No mai, haere mai. Welcome to our Involve webinar series. These hour-long presentations are a way for our friends from across the sector to connect to you, inform you, and get you excited about our in-person conference Involve Reunion 2021. Find out more at involve.org.nz. Kia ora koutou, ko Shannon aho, kei aratahi taku mahi. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to our final webinar session for February 2021. These Involve style webinars have been really enjoyable. I hope you've been able to see quite a few of them. I hope that you've been able to hear from the really amazing, diverse crew that we have in our sector, and that also has gotten you pumped and excited to attend Involve 2021 reunion, which is here in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, 9th to the 11th of August. I'm going to open with karakia. So if you know it, please join along. Ka inoi tātou. Ko ranganui kei urunga. Ko papatūnuku kei raro. Ko ngā tangata kei wainanui. Tihei moriora. I'm pretty excited that our final session is being presented by InsideOUT, a long time community collaborator, advocate, and friend to the youth sector, and particularly to Aotearoa. We get to hear today about how important language usage is, especially when working alongside people from the rainbow community and our young people in the rainbow community. I'm stoked that Rosie will be sharing their whakaaro. InsideOUT are a national organisation that works with and alongside young people and their ecosystem to make Aotearoa a safer place for all rainbow young people. So without further ado, over to you, Rosie. Thanks.
Great. So, for those of you that aren't familiar with our organisation, InsideOUT Ko Aro, we are a rainbow youth charity, so we're a national charity organisation, and our vision is basically for all rainbow rangatahi and takatāpui rangatahi in Aotearoa to have a sense of belonging and safety in their schools and communities. So yeah, this kind of is a vision that we try and achieve through multiple different avenues. One is through our mahi that we do, supporting students and staff to be as inclusive of rainbow and takatāpui students as possible. But our kind of scope has expanded over the years as we've kind of noticed that a lot of workplaces and government agencies and other community support services are also kind of wanting some support in this space with these kaupapa. So we do a bit of work in that space too, which is a big part of my role as volunteer and education coordinator. Cool. So what we're going to be covering today in our little kind of speed sesh is some commonly used words to describe sex, gender, and sexuality. Also a bit about pronouns and why they're important and how to honour other people's pronouns, and also some top tips about how to kind of apply those that learning practically to your mahi and just in your general life. And we'll also have a little chat about some further resources that can help you with your learning journey around this kaupapa. So we always like to kind of set the scene a little bit by sharing some statistics from Aotearoa-based research about our rainbow rangatahi, just to give you an idea of kind of the size of these populations and also the specific challenges that they are facing. These stats are all from the Youth 2000 series. So this was a survey that was conducted in 2012. And it surveyed 8,500 secondary school students from all around Aotearoa, so it's a really big, kind of hefty, good sample size. It found that 1 in 12 young people identify with a minority sexuality, so basically any sexuality that's not straight or that they were questioning their sexuality. And it also found that 1 in 25 young people reported that they identified as trans or were questioning their gender. And then it also found that only half, roughly, of the participants with minority sexualities had actually come out to somebody close to them. So yeah, obviously there's still, a large proportion of people that were surveyed at the time who didn't, feel comfortable doing this for, any number of reasons. But I guess, this stat here of only 15% felt that they could easily talk to their family about that, might contribute to that being, quite, difficult. This survey also actually found that rainbow people were 5 times more likely to attempt suicide than their non-rainbow peers, and that nearly 60% had deliberately self-harmed. So that's some really alarming data for these rangatahi in our country. It also found that depressive symptoms for these populations actually had increased since the beginning of these surveys being conducted. So they've been conducted 3 times, I believe, since, 4 times now. But, between 2001 and 2012, there had been a significant increase in presentation of depressive symptoms for our rainbow rangatahi. And this is really kind of interesting when we're comparing it with their non-rainbow peers, where the depressive symptoms were A, much lower, and B, had, remained quite consistent, so hadn't increased. So there's quite, a deviation between the experience of depression in rainbow and non-rainbow student populations. So yeah, it's hard to kind of pinpoint exactly why that might be, but we do have a hypothesis that it is because while our general mental health support services are getting kind of better equipped at serving young people in general, there might still be a bit of lag in terms of their ability to adequately support our rainbow and our takatāpui young people as they need to be supported, and in a way that's really affirming. Also, 1 in 5 of our rainbow students reported being bullied at school at least weekly, and this includes physical bullying, and there had been no improvement in this over the past 10 years. So that's really alarming that, in these learning environments, these students are, kind of afraid for their own safety. So why are we seeing these stats? A big part of it is minority stress. So yeah, really just the fact that we, anyone who doesn't kind of occupy the majority in a culture, so that's, to do with their, disability, their gender, their sexuality, their sex, and also their race and their immigrant status. So yeah, all these things can kind of mean you're either accepted and accommodated for within, a societal context, or people are actively going to be hostile towards you. So that is something that our rainbow and our takatāpui communities are experiencing. Also stigma and discrimination, rejection from family and friends, and these 2 kind of facets are generally kind of emerging from that lack of respect and understanding of the just sheer diversity of sexuality and sex and gender, because culturally it's not something that people are super educated about or have the space to learn about. So that kind of means that absence of understanding and knowledge can be kind of filled with stereotypes and stigmas and fear, which then leads to that young person being rejected by their loved ones and to them feeling isolated or disconnected. So now that we kind of have a better idea of what's happening for our rangatahi who are rainbow or takatāpui, you may have noticed some words on those earlier slides that might be new to you. So yeah, highly recommend having a read through the glossary to just kind of get a bit more understanding of those terms. But there's this kind of great illustration that Jay Barclay, our chairperson, former chairperson, I should say, and volunteer and contractor for us, drew up for us, that kind of tries to illustrate the relationship, so the differences and similarities between some of the terms that we've got in that glossary for sex and gender. So these are specifically talking about gender. So as you can see, we've got our cisgender umbrella here, which is my one. And then we've got this trans umbrella with the gender diverse umbrella kind of peeking out underneath it. So yeah, this one here is kind of half in and half out of the trans umbrella, because some of these terms describe people who may not also use the word trans, whereas some people who are gender diverse, so some people, for example, someone who is non-binary, they might say that they're both trans and non-binary because, their gender is different from the gender that they were assigned at birth. Whereas other people, say someone who's agender might, not use the word trans because, and vice versa as well. It's very much up to the individual. And then we also have our Māori and our Pasifika umbrellas in a separate kind of space. And this is because we really always want to underscore the fact that these terms exist within their own cultural context, and we don't ever want to be assimilating them into Western understandings and into kind of colonial understandings as well of gender. So yeah, takatāpui whakawahine tangata ira tāne. While there are kind of rough translations into English for these, we really try our best to keep them in their own cultural context and respect that their frameworks for gender and sex and sexuality all are very culturally specific, so you can't directly translate them. Also, it's important that for all these terms, we don't assume that just because somebody is rainbow and Māori or rainbow and Pasifika that they will automatically use any of this terminology, because there has had to be a real reclamation process that has been undergone in order for people to have access to this language and feel comfortable using this language, because of a history of colonization that really attempted to erase these histories and also these just frameworks. So there is quite a paradox with talking about terminology, and I think we just always want to underscore that it can be a bit daunting when you're trying to memorize all these terms or understand what all of them are, but ultimately really a term isn't going to actually tell you what you need to know about supporting somebody and providing them with the services that they need. It's more just being open and appreciating that, finding out about what that term might mean for them or what experiences they may have had because of their identity will be important to supporting them. But there's never been a consensus on any rainbow related term. So there's not one static definition for each of these words. So that's why it's important to listen to, the individual's relationship to that language. The main reason why terminology is important and why you need to respect it is that it's a way of conveying that you're open to learning about, what that journey is for that person, what those identities mean for them, and also tells them that you're respecting their right to self-define and that you are paying attention and you're seeing who they are. So obviously, if you elect to correct somebody's language, or you tell them, no, you're not this, you're that, that's a pretty surefire way to kind of destroy rapport with them, discourage them from returning to you and seeking additional services from you. And it can be really distressing if you refuse to use the correct language for them, especially because especially as a young person, if they don't have loved ones that they can talk to about it, it can be really distressing to have yet another space that doesn't respect who they are. Conversely, though, if you do respect and listen to the language that somebody uses and reflect that back to them, it will indicate that you're safe and that you're respecting their right to self-define, and it's really just communicating to them that that you acknowledge that they're the expert about their own identity and experience, and it's really just how to whakamana somebody, to acknowledge their mana and help to enhance their mana as an individual who has kind of agency over their own narrative and over their own identity. So Martin says, I think our linguistic choices are crucial, particularly as minorities. That's kind of how we relate to the world, by choosing certain words to describe us, our behaviours, our histories, whatever. I think it's really important to honour pronouns and names. If I call myself transgender, don't call me a transsexual. I think our word choices are deliberate, and I don't like seeing other people mess with those. So yeah, that kind of describes that pretty well. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about different terms that we might use to describe gender, but yeah, always like to kind of really reiterate what gender is and what we're talking about when we say gender. So gender is about people's self-perception, and it's really contingent on people's social and cultural context. So, it's about the way that you've been socialized and the context you've grown up in, and, narratives that you've been taught about masculinity and femininity and everything kind of in between. Also, we don't have time to go into sex today, but we always, really like to reiterate that gender and sex, while they're two things that are really often conflated in a lot of cultures, sex is referring to, biological facets of who you are, such as your reproductive function and organs, your chromosomal makeup, hormonal makeup, and secondary sex characteristics that you develop at puberty. Whereas gender is talking about your social, relationship with yourself according to different kind of archetypes and roles that you've been surrounded by. So trans is an umbrella term, and that's as was illustrated in that image before, a literal umbrella is that it really encompasses anybody who has a gender that is different from the one that they were assigned at birth according to their sex. So again, these things get conflated a lot. If somebody's assigned male at birth, then they'll people will immediately assume that they're a boy and that they will grow into a man, and that's obviously not always the case. And that, trans can include genders outside of the traditional Western gender binary of men and women. And so pronouns are kind of a part of that. And I think it is important that pronouns, everybody has pronouns. I feel like there's this understanding that pronouns are just a trans thing. But in actuality, whether you are cis or trans, so cis, by the way, it's written in our glossary there, but cis or cisgender is basically just a word to say that the gender that you were assigned at birth is the one that you identify with. So for example, I was assigned female at birth as my sex, and then I was therefore told that I was a woman or going to be a woman. I was a girl, and I identify as a woman. So because of that alignment, I am cis or cisgender. But just because I'm cis doesn't mean I don't have pronouns that are correct and incorrect for me. So I use she, her pronouns, and I'm comfy with those. And I think it's important to note that everybody has language that they feel comfortable or uncomfortable having used in reference to them. It's not just trans and non-binary and gender diverse people. And that also there's kind of assumptions about, if somebody is non-binary or gender diverse, that they'll automatically not use she, her, or he, him pronouns. There are still people who are non-binary who would use multiple sets and be comfortable with those. But yeah, it's really up to the individual, and that pronouns aren't really inherently linked to gender, but they can help somebody to feel recognised for the gender that they are. Alrighty, so talked a bit about gender and pronouns. I'm gonna give you all an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have about terms for sexuality. So you'll see in that glossary that there's a section on sexuality. So if there's any words in there that you'd like a bit more clarity on, feel free to pop a question in the chat box. Cool. Don't be shy. I think it's also important to note, I'll say while I wait for any questions, that we see the words sexual orientation used a lot when we're talking about sexuality, but the words that are in that glossary, there are words in there to describe different sexual orientations, but there's also words in there that describe different forms of attraction, and kind of it's more about the ways that you're attracted to somebody rather than the people or the genders that you're attracted to. So, you know, sexual orientation is kind of, I always say it as like, yeah, talking about the direction in which your attraction goes. So if you're, you know, gay or straight or bi or pan or queer, that's kind of talking about other people. So, you know, other people that you're attracted to. Whereas terms like asexual and demisexual are talking about yourself and the ways that you experience attraction. So the ways you experience sexual attraction. There's also aromantic. So that's saying, you know, that you don't experience romantic attraction to people necessarily. You could be asexual and aromantic. So, you know, sexual and romantic relationships aren't something that you're that bothered about. But some people might be aromantic but sexual and vice versa. So I think we get kind of, you know, culturally we often conflate these things, like saying, you know, if you're in a relationship with someone, there's an assumption that you're, you know, in a sexual and romantic relationship. But for people who are ace or asexual, you know, that might not be the case. Of course, all these things do exist on a spectrum, but yeah, I think we always just like to emphasize that no matter what that attraction looks like, it's all normal. I think there is a bit of a thing, especially with young asexual people or aromantic people, there's kind of these narratives that they get fed of like, oh, you'll meet the right person one day, you know, or you'll grow out of it kind of thing. And it's really important, you know, yeah, maybe they might, but also it's really important to say, that's all good, you know, like if this is how you feel your entire life, that's fine and normal, because there's this kind of, yeah, sense that with some asexual people are like, oh, but you know, if you don't have that one primary relationship or something, then you'll be missing out on something. But it's really important to emphasize the, you know, the value of other relationships in a young person's life or just any person's life, and yeah, not kind of invalidate their sexuality. We also have a video about asexuality and demisexuality as part of a video series that I will mention at the end too. And that's really worth checking out if you want to hear from people with those identities and experiences. Yeah, it's really valuable. Cool. Yeah, if anyone has any questions that aren't related to sexuality stuff as well, feel free to pop them into the chat and I can refer to them. But yeah, I think some key kind of things to keep in mind when it comes to terms for sexuality is that people might use multiple terms or different terms in different contexts for simplicity. So an example for myself is that I use the word, like, to me, I'm queer. Like, queer is the word to me that kind of best encompasses my relationship to my sexuality and to just how I live my life. But in some contexts, I would say that I was bi, or I would say that I was gay. Yeah, it's really because, you know, language is obviously a way that we try and be comprehensible to other people. So if I'm in a space where, you know, I feel like someone might not know what queer means to me, I would rather just say that I'm bi, because that would probably be easier for them to understand. So it's just, yeah, appreciating that people might use different terms at different times. Also, just being mindful that, you know, some terms that have actually been kind of weaponized against people in our communities in the past have been reclaimed by some people, especially younger generations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is comfortable with that terminology. So yeah, as I said, you know, I use queer, and that's a really important word for me, but I fully respect that that is not a term that everyone is comfortable with, especially people, you know, that have grown up in kind of older generations to myself who've maybe had that weaponized against them and used as a slur. So yeah, just keeping that stuff in mind. And that's why it's interesting, because in the States, they seem to use queer as kind of a stand-in for rainbow, as a kind of umbrella term to describe everyone in rainbow communities. Whereas here in Aotearoa, that's not something we're doing as much because of that history of it. So we tend to say rainbow communities or LGBTQIA+ communities. And yeah, also important thing to keep in mind, which I think is especially relevant for supporting rangatahi, is that the language that someone may use could change over time. And this does not invalidate their identity or their identities. It's, you know, just a normal part of growing up and being a person, is that, you know, they might be exposed to different understandings or different language over time that better describes their experience. So it doesn't invalidate, you know, the fact that they, were, you know, that was an important word for them back in the day, but now that they've found a more accurate term, it's good to be reflexive about that language and just be open to reflecting those changes. Got a question here. Yeah. I've heard it said that asking what are your pronouns is better than asking what are your preferred pronouns. Could you please speak to this? Great question. Yes, so preferred pronouns is definitely something that's been used a bit, but I think there's been a move away from that, just to really underscore the fact that that it's not optional for people to respect those pronouns, because I think when it's sort of framed as a preference, there seems to be a bit more leeway for people to decide whether or not they want to honor those things. Whereas if you say, you know, these are my pronouns, like these are the pronouns I use, there's kind of, yeah, less wiggle room for people to kind of just opt to not respect them. So yeah, we tend to say, you know, yeah, correct or incorrect pronouns. And yeah, as I said before, there might be multiple sets of pronouns that are correct for somebody. But yeah, it's moving away from that preference language to just say, these are the right ones. These ones are actually incorrect and not aligned with who I am. Hopefully that answers the question. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit now. I'm just going to check the Q&A bit. Oh no, that's all right. Sorry. What have I done here? Oh. No. Okay, cool. Cool. So I'm going to talk briefly about microaggressions. So microaggressions are kind of everyday, verbal or non-verbal slights against somebody that kind of, might invalidate their identity. And I think it's important to note that microaggressions, while they are, the micro kind of suggests that it might not be a huge deal. These things can really build up over time. So this is an illustration that kind of just tries to convey the idea that, if somebody misgenders or uses the wrong pronouns for you as a, trans or non-binary or gender diverse person, then, if that happens once in a day, it's sort of similar to someone throwing a pebble. So, that might hit you or it might miss you. But when that's happening, over and over throughout a whole day, that really can take a toll on you. So again, it's really important to be respecting and reflecting that language that our young people are using to describe their identities and experiences, because doing so prevents the likelihood that they'll feel disrespected or invalidated. And that's unfortunately a common occurrence for many of our rainbow and takatāpui young people. And again, I will say that similar to minority stress, this is something that not just our rainbow and takatāpui communities are experiencing. It could be if somebody is having their name mispronounced constantly because it's not an English name, and someone saying, "Oh, I can't pronounce that. Can I just shorten it?" That's something that's actually really awful and disrespectful. So it can be seen as a microaggression, but it's something that invalidates somebody's identity. So for the last few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about our top tips for ensuring that inclusive language when you're, communicating not just with rangatahi that you're supporting, but also just in general. So normalizing sharing your own pronouns and asking others for theirs. So some people kind of get nervous and think, oh, is it rude to ask someone for their pronouns? But honestly, people will be really grateful that you're opening up that space and they're not having to do that themselves. So there's an example there. Thinking about how you address groups of people is important as well. Doing the whole hello, ladies and gentlemen is can be, exclusionary of other people in the space who don't identify as ladies or gentlemen. So thinking about other ways to address groups, greetings in te reo Māori are good. Kia ora koutou is, not gender specific. Also thinking about how you're collecting people's data and the kind of information that you're asking in terms of gender when it comes to, forms that you're getting people to sign as well. So even having an option for, people to share their pronouns in that space. And also including an option for a preferred name. So, while you might need somebody's legal name, having an option for a preferred name is really helpful for, some trans and gender diverse people who haven't been able to have their ID documents changed, but who, don't want their birth name used. So preferred name is a really great thing to include a space for. And yes, just top tips really is that asking people to explain what the language they use for them means you can, establish a good rapport with them and support them. But also, there's a difference between doing that and asking them, 100 questions in a day kind of thing. So, while you can ask them what specifically, certain terms might mean for them, it is important to seek out other avenues for learning about that stuff so that they don't feel that pressure to kind of be an ambassador for their communities. And asking questions from a place of respect, not just curiosity. If you are just curious, it's probably better to seek out other resources, and just thinking about that privacy and boundaries for people. One way you can kind of try and exemplify those that respect for boundaries is actually asking questions before you ask questions. So that basically means saying, is it okay if I ask you about this thing? Because that kind of gives people an option to opt in or out, which, yeah, is important, because sometimes they feel a pressure, especially if there's a dynamic there. They're a young person and you're, in a position that they would regard as authority. They might feel obligated to answer that question unless you make it clear that they don't have to answer it if they don't want to. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And remember, never assume someone's identity or what language they use. Instead, respect and reflect. So respect that language, respect that they know themselves best, and reflect the language that they're using to describe themselves. So yeah, these are some of our resources that we would highly recommend checking out. You're probably all pretty familiar with things like BeThere.nz, which is an awesome resource that came out last year. Our own website has some great free resources, including more info and a little video about pronouns. Our video series that kind of explores a variety of different communities within the rainbow that were, made by people and for people to kind of speak to their own experiences. And yeah, a few other things in here. But yeah, I'm just wondering if anyone has any final questions before I hand it back over. I appreciate that I've just been speaking a lot.
The webinar process is a bit intense, eh?
I'm just like, it's so hard because, we do a few webinars, but it's often just, kanohi ki te kanohi with real faces. And I'm like, I can never know, like, whether people have been, like, following everything or if they're, like, completely lost. But hopefully it's the former.
No, I think, yeah, tōtoko what Bethany has just said there about your whakaaro. I think also that is a really amazing PowerPoint that if you could send to me, Rosie, will pop that alongside the video on our YouTube. And also, I think your website is super helpful. I really love using it.
One little thing, sorry, to add. I just noticed now that Amanda asked whether there's a free text service for young people to connect with counsellors from rainbow communities. It's an amazing question. There is a phone line. There is a free phone line that is available from 6 to 9 p.m. every day called Outline. And they are an amazing service that is specifically catered toward, so it's rainbow counsellors supporting rainbow people. So yeah, they're amazing. So it's just 0800 Outline. Yeah, highly recommend checking them out if they're wanting specifically rainbow people. But obviously, yeah, Youthline, we've done some training with Youthline as well. So can also recommend Youthline.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I'd like to close off with karakia, and then if I could just grab a few seconds of your time after we close the webinar, Rosie, that would be awesome. Thanks again for coming, everybody in the webinar world. This is our last one, and that's because we want to make sure that you feel invested to attend the actual Involve, again, 9th to the 11th of August, here in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, and beaming out across Aotearoa via some of our digital streams. Find out more, involve.org.nz. Great, okay, so I'll close off with karakia ka inoi tātou. Kia whakairia te tāpū, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turu ki whakataha ai, kia turu ki whakataha ai, haumia huia, tai ki e.
Awesome.
Bye team!
Kia koutou.
So ngā mihi kia koe, Rosie. I am super excited that with my Youthline hat on, I get to interact quite a lot with InsideOUT. And so I'm grateful that you've shared your whakaaro with a wider set of people, especially because I would say that people are probably a little bit more excited about what Involve could possibly bring them in terms of professional development like this. And if you are excited peeps and you think, oh wow, I can't wait to attend Involve and hear more about Inside Out and hear more from Rosie and hear more from the crew that bring a lot of amazing goodness out to our rainbow young people, then remember, check out involve.org.nz. Our tickets, our early bird tickets are now live. You can register to attend. Again, our applications are open for presentations, and likely I think people will be real down with making sure that stuff that they're doing out there in their communities is giving back to a lot wider set of people like our rainbow young people.
I just have